It was an accident so stupid, it was like running with a pencil.
Steve Irwin wasn't just a man in khakis with a fearless grin. He was a force of nature, a voice for creatures most of us feared, and a bridge between the wild and our living rooms. Crocodile Hunter didn't leap into swamps and wrestle reptiles for thrills. He did it to show us that the world was bigger, wilder, and more beautiful than we dared to imagine. To millions, he seemed unstoppable, too alive, too passionate, too full of fire to ever be extinguished. But in September of 2006, the unthinkable happened. A freak accident off the coast of Queensland took him from the world forever. The man who had stared down crocodiles and cobras was suddenly gone, and the silence he left behind was deafening. Yet his story didn't end that day. In the years that followed, the world watched his family, especially his wife Terri, wrestle with grief, carry his mission, and face impossible battles against forces far larger than themselves. It is a story of heartbreak, resilience, and the kind of devotion that defies time itself. The love between Steve and Terri was never a side note in his journey. It was the heartbeat of everything they built, from Australia's zoo to the global conservation efforts that touched lives across the planet. In the early 1990s, Terri Raines lived in Oregon, surrounded by towering evergreens and the mist of the Pacific Northwest. She wasn't just fond of animals, she had built her life around them. Cougar Country Wildlife Park, the sanctuary she ran, she poured her soul into caring for injured eagles, bears, and cougars. Night after night, she nursed creatures back to health, releasing them into the wild she so fiercely protected. Meanwhile, in Queensland, Steve Irwin was becoming a legend. The son of Bob and Lynn Irwin, he practically grew up with crocodiles at his side. By his 20s, he was already leading relocations for Australia's wildlife services, tackling massive reptiles with nothing but grit and bare hands. For Steve, it wasn't about money or fame. It was love, pure and unshakable. In 1991, fate brought Terri across the ocean. She visited the small reptile park Steve called home and stumbled into one of his crocodile demonstrations. There he was, khaki shorts, sweat rolling down his brow, voice bursting with excitement as he spoke of crocodiles not as monsters but as intelligent creatures with unique personalities. Terri was transfixed. This wasn't showmanship. It was passion. And for Steve, the moment was just as powerful. Later, he admitted it was love at first sight. Within 4 months, they were engaged. Instead of a honeymoon sipping champagne, they spent theirs knee-deep in swamps, wrangling crocodiles with a cameraman in tow. Those wild moments became the first episode of The Crocodile Hunter. What began as a love story grew into a global phenomenon. By 1996, the Irwins had transformed the modest reptile park into the sprawling sanctuary we now know as Australia's Zoo. Their children, Bindi and Robert, grew up bottle-feeding kangaroos, cuddling koalas, and learning that protecting animals wasn't a job, it was life itself. But on the morning of September 4, 2006, everything changed. Steve kissed Terri goodbye before heading out to film a documentary called Ocean's Deadliest. His grin was wide, his laugh booming as always. Terry's playful warning, "Don't do anything I wouldn't do," was met with his quick reply, "Possum, that's everything." Hours later, Terri received the call that shattered her world. Steve had been pierced in the chest by a stingray barb, a bizarre one-in-a-million accident. The man who had faced danger 1,000 times over was gone in seconds. The news stunned the globe. Television networks broke into programming. Newspapers ran his smiling face across front pages. Millions mourned a man who had made them feel alive. At his memorial, more than 5,000 people filled the Crocodile Steve had built with his own hands, and hundreds of thousands more gathered outside. Many carried sunflowers, his favorite flower. Around the world, 300 million tuned in. Terri, clad in black, stood before them without a single note. Through tears, she spoke from her heart, recalling his final voicemail, filled with warmth and love. Then she did something extraordinary. She vowed that Steve's mission would not die with him. She would carry it forward, for their children, for the animals, and for the millions Steve had inspired. In the years after his death, Terri was thrust into an unwanted spotlight. Everyone wondered if she would ever move on. When she finally broke her silence more than 15 years later, her words stunned the world. She wasn't searching for love again because she had already found it. What she and Steve shared wasn't just a chapter in her life. It was the whole book. Her days were consumed with raising Bindi and Robert, managing the zoo and overseeing conservation projects. But in the quiet of night, grief crept in. She kept one of Steve's khaki shirts in her closet, sometimes draping it over her shoulders, comforted by the faint trace of his scent. His old toothbrush remained by the sink, untouched, a quiet monument to a man she could never replace. Friends tried to introduce her to companions, but Terri politely declined. She wasn't lonely. She wasn't broken. She had simply already lived a love so deep it could never be repeated. What about you? Do you think it's possible to love so completely that you never move on? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to know what you think. Terri found solace in rewatching episodes of The Crocodile Hunter, letting his voice and laughter fill the silence. Sometimes Bindi would find her staring at an old photo of Steve holding a bat or grinning beside a croc, and simply wrap her arm around her mother's waist in quiet solidarity. Together, they carried him forward. But just as Terri began to find balance, a new storm appeared, one born not of grief but of greed. In 2007, only a year after Steve's passing, Terri received a letter that left her reeling. A mining corporation, Cape Alumina, announced plans to strip mine land that had been set aside as the Steve Irwin Wildlife Reserve. To Terri, it wasn't just land. It was sacred, 135,000 hectares of wilderness created in Steve's honor, teeming with rare ecosystems, crystal-clear springs, and breeding grounds for the saltwater crocodiles he loved. The proposal threatened to turn those habitats into dust. Bulldozers where turtles hatched, or trucks roaring where cockatoos once called. Rivers diverted into pits. The thought was unbearable. Terri didn't hesitate. She launched into battle with nothing but conviction and Steve's legacy behind her. Mining companies had deep pockets, lawyers, and government allies. Terri had none of that. What she did have was courage, and millions of people who still believed in Steve. She stormed government offices armed not with statistics, but with photographs. Steve cradling crocs, hatchlings scrambling across sand, wetlands glistening in the sun. She rallied the public, live-streaming the reserve, showing exactly what was at stake. Donations poured in, even from children who mailed pocket money with crayon notes. For Steve's crocs. Year after year, the fight dragged on, wearing her down but never breaking her. Finally, in 2013, after 6 relentless years, victory came. Queensland government banned mining on the reserve forever, granting it protections stronger than even the Great Barrier Reef. When the decision was announced, Terri stepped away from cameras and wept, not in grief but in relief. Steve's sanctuary would live on. Through it all, she carried 3 truths. First, grief has no finish line. Doesn't fade on schedule. Becomes a part of you, something you learn to live with. Second, love doesn't die. Transforms. Steve wasn't a memory. He was a presence woven into every decision, every laugh, every battle won. And third, conservation isn't about politics or profits. It's about people, families, and futures. Terri knew the fight wasn't just to protect crocodiles or forests. It was about ensuring children could inherit a world as wild and untamed as the one Steve loved. Today, stepping into Australia's zoo is like stepping into Steve's vision. His photographs line the pathways, his voice echoes through conservation projects, his laughter still seems to live among the trees. The Steve Irwin Wildlife Reserve has expanded to protect even more wilderness. Donations still arrive daily, often in tiny envelopes from children who never even met him, marked simply, "For Steve." Bindi, now a mother herself, raises her daughter Grace Warrior with the same wonder she grew up in. Robert has become a renowned photographer, capturing stunning images of wildlife while carrying his father's spark of awe. And Terri, the matriarch who never stopped fighting, continues to expand Steve's dream, creating programs that bring struggling teenagers into the zoo to heal through animals, showing that conservation doesn't just save wildlife, it saves people too. In 2018, Steve Irwin Day was officially declared, a tribute to a man who made the world fall in love with the wild. Every November 15th, children learn not just about crocodiles but about courage, joy, and the power of protecting what we love. Australia's zoo isn't a monument. It's alive. It breathes. Grows. It is proof that one man's passion, carried forward by a family's devotion, can ripple through generations. Steve Irwin's story didn't end in 2006. Continues today, in every animal saved, every forest protected, every child inspired to care for the wild world around them.